ladies and gentlemen. How nice to see so many of you here. As you well know, during the course of the festival, we've been interviewing or welcoming a number of Gilbert and Sullivan personalities from the festival to invite them to give us their choice of 8 records that they would take with them if they were cast away on a desert island. And this morning's castaway is one of the best known personalities that we've had in Buxton for most of the 13 years. He's internationally renowned as an adjudicator of both Gilbert and Sullivan and light opera musical festivals. Please welcome Mr. David Turner.
Thank you.
Good morning, David.
Good morning.
How do you think you would react to this question, to the solitude of a desert island?
I think I would probably hate the solitude, which I think is reflected in the music I've chosen, because they're all bursting with memories.
Yes.
I have 3 good handkerchiefs with me this morning.
Does anything about the island or the prospect of being on this island worry you?
No, I mean, I think most of us in life would welcome the opportunity of a bit of solitude, just to be on one's own. Survival's important, but it is in today's world, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, would there be things that you'd be happy to get away from?
Yes. Mobile phones, rude people.
I think virtually everybody who sat there said mobile phones. Oh, very interesting.
What a pain.
Do you have one?
No.
No. Well, it's...
And
yes.
I intend not having one.
Yeah, very good.
I really do. People joke when they ring me at the office, you know, they say, can we email it? And I say, sorry, don't have email. And they said, well, have you got a mobile phone number? And I say, no. I said, we actually still use quill pens. And they say, good for you. You know, this is it. I just hate being get-atable all the time. I was in Waterford with my boss, Sir Stephen Whaley-Cohen. We went over there for a meeting at Waterford Glass, because in the year that the Mousetrap was 50, Waterford were going to do a special mouse. It didn't ever actually happen, but we went over there to have a meeting, and we'd a long wait for a flight back on the next day. It was December. It was about the first week in December. And Waterford Glass said, well, we can't have you just hanging about in the morning. We'll take you out in the car. Where would you like to go? Well, I have a very great affection for Hook Head in Waterford, and I don't know whether you've been. You should have gone to Hook Head. If you don't know the saying, it's where the saying by hook or by crook comes, because you go by road, and when you come back, you have to go a different way, and you go either by the river Hook or the river Crook. Yeah. And that's where that saying comes from. And we went out there on this bitterly but beautiful, bright December morning, and we stood on Hook Head where the sea hits the rocks and comes up, and it was just absolute. And my boss's phone rang, and there he was, onto London, and I stood there and I looked at the sea and I looked at the snow on the mountains. No. That decided me forever against a mobile phone.
How easily was it to pick 8 records that you'd take with you?
Actually, I think it was fairly difficult. I've done this sort of twice before. The BBC did a series of programmes called My Kind of Music, which I did, and I got the tape. It was 25 years ago. I couldn't believe it was so long ago. And I kept the tape and I put it up, and I didn't have there's not a single piece here that was then. I also did for RTE, which is the Irish radio station. They call theirs Theatre Nights because they choose theatrical people and hope we're going to choose theatrical music. And there's 1 or 2 from that. But no, I found it very difficult. Well, initially I found it, I didn't know what to choose. And then, of course, the old brain started going, and they were coming thick and fast. Yeah. But all of them, in a way, conjure up memories. They really do. It's why I think I enjoy solitude, but I don't want to lose the link.
Let's hear the first one, David.
Right. Now, the first well, I think the whole thing is over-sentimental, and forgive me if it is. My upbringing was a very strict nonconformist upbringing where the chapel is fairly important. And Sunday, and I know you were Wesleyan, weren't you? The Sunday was completely taken up with the chapel. This shows you how long ago it was, I was given the Sunday joint in a tin with the potatoes all round, and I went on my way to chapel and dropped it off at the bakery, and they put it in the oven and started it going, and I went to, first of all, morning Sunday school and then morning service. Then home I came, collected the meat from the bakehouse, and we had lunch, and then I went to Sunday school, and once a month we had a prayer meeting at 5:30 and evening service at 6. So the chapel sort of really dominated a lot of thinking, and really does now. It's very odd. My father was a Congregationalist, my mother was a Baptist, and I was a Methodist. So we did our bit for getting everybody together. But it really, I'm so glad I had those intense young days where I met a lot of wonderful people, wonderfully kind people, and the thinking I had then stays with me. I wish we had that caring we had 50 years ago, we don't have today. I mean, I have to say, I'm very sort of disheartened with the church at the moment. I have no wish to jig up and down or wave a flag or sway in time to the music or indeed sing a one-verse hymn 4 times. But in those old days, it was simple and it was caring and it had great warmth. But often in the chapels it was a struggle. I mean, in our own circuit, our superintendent minister was W.J. Paradine Frost, David Frost's father. And Paradine Frost was known throughout the circuit as Paradise Lost. And he was a lovely man. I mean, he really was a lovely man. But he had 40 churches. And 40 churches in the circuit was an enormous undertaking. But once a year, we had what we called the circuit rally. And all 40 chapels came together in the big circuit chapel at Brook Street in Rawns, came to the big chapel, and we had a real good sing. And the choirs from all the chapels, sometimes there were only 6 in a choir and sometimes there were 15, but they never really in a 12-month had a really good sing. So once a year we came together and we sang one of the big choruses, often from Messiah, but the one I've chosen is the one I remember most vividly, which is from Mendelssohn's Elijah, and it's Be Not Afraid.
It's interesting, David, the picture you painted of chapel life 50, 60 years ago certainly rang a bell with me, and I bet it did with many others in the audience. The world seems to have got too fast, hasn't it?
Well, I mean, when you listen to that and you think that for 52 weeks in the year you struggled along with a harmonium probably to make a joyful noise, but then to come together once a year.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah, it's absolutely wonderful. And what is interesting on that recording, I didn't realise, it's a very old recording, that the piece which leads into it, which is a soprano solo, was sung by Elizabeth Harwood, who was, of course, at Covent Garden. Yeah. The interesting thing was her mother was in our chapel choir. Yeah. And Elizabeth was a lovely girl, and she died when she was about 44, which was really quite tragic. But she was a very romantic girl, and her marriage couldn't have been more romantic because she was going to BBC at Bristol to record something. She got on the train at Paddington, first class, settled down, and this very handsome young man got into the carriage and chatted her up all the way to Bristol, which she quite enjoyed. And she went off to the BBC and did her work, stayed overnight, got the train at Temple Meads to come back, sat down in the train, the door opened, and it was the same handsome young man who was managing director of Royal Cards. I mean, Royal Christmas cards, and they are beautiful, incredibly wealthy, and they fell in love, and they were married. I mean, it was just as, you know, it was, as Elizabeth always said, it was meant to be. But she was a very ordinary, she had this glorious soprano voice. I remember going to hear her sing Messiah at the Albert Hall, and she came on quite strangely onto the platform, and her aunt was there, and I said, we went round afterwards, and her aunt said, "What's the matter with you when you came on?" She said, "Well, I didn't have time to finish the dress. It's all pinned up at the back." So she sort of came on sideways. She became an international star, but never lost her roots.
Right. What about your roots, David? You were born and your childhood growing up?
I was born in shoemaking country because my father was a cobbler. I was born in Northamptonshire. My parents were very ordinary people, and yet theatrical people, because my father, not only being a cobbler, in the evenings was stage manager at the local theatre. And in those days, of course, every town had a theatre. Kettering, which was a very ordinary manufacturing town, had a 1,200 seat theatre, and he would be there in the evening. He would work all day with the shoes and go there at night. And my mother provided digs. So, and I remember each week, of course, when a touring company came in, you wondered who would be coming to stay. And I remember Tessie O'Shea and Betty Driver and people like that who were the salt of the earth, really. Yeah. So I always had a sort of theatrical background, although I was never encouraged, never. Never in all my years, and my mother, God bless her, has only recently died. Never in all the years did I ever get a good luck card. Never once did they ever say, "Has it gone well?" or "Was it all right?" Never. In fact, on the night I directed The Mousetrap for the first time, which 20 years next year, my old local operatic society got a coach up to come to the first night and rang me up and said, "Would your mother and dad like to come to the first night?" And I said, "Oh," because I'd no way of getting them there. So they came up to London in the coach with the operatic society, and we sat them in the front row of the dress circle, and they were really treated right royally. And no card, of course, no hope it goes well, but I didn't expect it. Anyway, there wasn't a lot of time afterwards. They piled in the coach with everybody else and they went home. So I rang them the next day and I got my mother. And I said, "Well, and she answered, of course. And I said, "Oh, well, you're obviously home, safe." "Yes." "Everything all right?" "Yes." "Is father all right?" "Yes." And I thought, I've never, it drives me mad to hear people out front saying when people come out of the show, "Have you enjoyed it?" I mean, if it's lousy, how can you say, "No, it was awful"? And I wasn't going to ask, and I never did, but I did say to her, "Well, you got home safely then?" "Oh, we did have a lovely evening," she said. So I said, "Good." She said, "We stopped on the motorway at 1 in the morning and we had egg and sausage and chips." She never mentioned the play. But that, of course, is provincial life in that time. You didn't go around embracing one another, or, you know, if I'd have put my arms around my mother and said, "Oh, I do love you, Mother," she'd think I'd taken leave of my senses. Yeah. I think the lovely thing is, of course, we never felt we had to say it.
That's right.
There wasn't the need to say it. It was shown in other ways. But no, I mean, they were ordinary people. When I won a scholarship to go to grammar school, I was sent home from junior school to tell my mother, who was at home. And I just ran in. "Oh, good," she said, and off I went back to school. When I came back for lunch, it was my dream, because flapping on the line was a pudding cloth, which meant she'd made a suet pudding. And that was her way of saying, "Well done." Well done.
Yeah, super. Yeah. And were you involved at all in theatre at school or
Well,
amateurs?
not really. I was really right from the beginning involved in the professional theatre, but seeing it from the non-glamorous side. I mean, panto, of course, for every theatre is a godsend, keeps us going for the rest of the year, probably. But it was the memories are going with my father on Christmas morning to stoke the boiler and things. So it was lovely and warm on Boxing Day for the performances at 2 o'clock, 5 o'clock and 8 o'clock. And seeing what a lonely life it can be. My mother was not a very outgoing soul, but she was a kind person. And I know the people that came to stay with us over the years, she looked after them. There was a fire in the grate, and there was a supper for them when they came home from the theatre. And I realised, you know, that she was doing a good job, but I realised, of course, that many places when you're on tour, that just doesn't happen.
That's right.
It's a very lonely, unglamorous existence. So you know, it was from the professional side of things.
Let's have record number 2, if we may.
My father was a stage manager for our local theatre, which was the Savoy at Kettering. And at Northampton, which is just 11 miles up the road, they had, and still do have, an international repertory company. And they decided to have a dual theatre, one in Kettering, one in Northampton. So they played the first week in Northampton and the second week in Kettering. And so each week, for 50 weeks of the year, there was a play, and brilliant they were too. And we look back and we think, oh, they were so wonderful. But of course, in reality, there were lots of shortcomings. And what is very important for a straight play is often the music you use to introduce them. And I have a feeling the piece of music which I've chosen, which is the Waltz from the Masquerade Suite by Khachaturian, is the music which introduced a drama, a tragedy, a romance, a farce. They seemed only to have the one piece of music. So the Waltz from the Masquerade Suite. I could see that was not a good introduction to Henry V or the Cherry Orchard.
How quickly did you decide from school days what you wanted to be, and were you what you wanted to be?
I don't think I've ever been very good at making decisions. I've tended, and I was advised very potently in later life to let life unfold. And I think I've always done that. I don't think I ever was ambitious. I think I've been very foolish. I wasn't ambitious. I just found myself in situations. And I think that's how it's gone on.
So from school, what developed from
well,
school?
you know, you go, like all youngsters, you go through a series of jobs. I was a member of the Operatic Society at home, which was great learning experience.
Singing, acting?
Acting.
Yeah.
Of course, it was a golden time for operatic societies, the 50s, when one fought to be accepted. I remember going to audition for the Operatic Society, and there were 60 men to audition to join. Can you imagine? And if you got in, you were really one of the town's jet set. You'd arrived. And I have a feeling I got in because I could sell tickets. I don't know that I was particularly talented. But of course, from that, I worked under professionals. Leslie Branch, who was a West End director, came and was our director. Our choreographer was Betty Patterson at the Patterson Academy in Coventry, where we had to go, and she was a martinet, by golly. And we had a superb musical director, and really you didn't settle for anything other than the best. And I know when one looks back, it always seems rosy and wonderful, and it probably wasn't as rosy and wonderful as we think, but the quality of music was amazing then, absolutely amazing. So, you know, I was very happy to get caught up in that and learn and train and do all I could to be a better performer.
This was still in Northampton?
Still in Northamptonshire.
Yeah.
And I don't really regret having that desire. I don't think I ever realised, indeed, that I would go any further than the bounds of the county. But it was it's something which I shall bring up probably later on, but it was the influence of Constance Shacklock, the opera singer, that I really did indeed make the transition. Mm-hmm. She was an enormous influence to me. I mean, she was an international opera singer, renowned, of course, for singing at the last night of the proms. She sang 10 consecutive years. She was there with, what did she sing? Not Land of Hope and
Jerusalem.
No, not Jerusalem.
Rule Britannia.
Rule Britannia.
Well, yes.
She and, of course, Sir Malcolm Sargent were a great team. And she was an enormous influence to me. And her advice was always, let life unfold. And I've always done that. That's how I'm sitting here.
Let's have record number 3.
Well, eventually, of course, having sat for hundreds of productions with the Northampton Repertory Company at Kettering, life moved on and I had my own repertory theatre, which was the Repertory Theatre at the Connaught Theatre in Worthing. And it's always been a troublesome theatre. It's never had the support from the town that it should have had, and yet it was a great training theatre where the likes of Glenda Jackson began their careers. People like Daniel Massey and Dinsdale Lansdowne and Sarah Miles, the list is endless. It was a great training theatre. And I was encouraged, the vacancy came to be the administrator, I think it just was the administrator of the theatre, and I was encouraged to apply. And my natural attitude was, well, I won't get it. Apply! All right, I'll apply. And I did, and I got an interview. 9:30 on a Monday morning, and there were 16 to be interviewed, which is pretty daunting. And to be number 1, I mean, you cut your teeth on the first one and forget them. Shouldn't say that.
No, you shouldn't.
Wrong thing to say at a festival, isn't it? No, as in an interview, you know, you think, oh yes, he's all right, but we need to go up or below that. Anyway, I went into this meeting in the town hall in Worthing to be confronted by the mayor and 16 members of the board, which was pretty daunting. And I just had that attitude, well, if I'm meant to get it, I'll get it. And I had that sort of nonchalant approach, which apparently was just right, because at 1:45 in the afternoon I was called back in. Can you believe all that time? 1:45 I was called back in and I was given the appointment. And the theatre was closed, and it was a case of putting together a company. And the very first production was Oscar Wilde and An Ideal Husband, and I was very tempted to have as the introductory music the Waltz from the Masquerade Swing. But I didn't. I had Handel in the Strand by Percy Grainger.
Lovely. So the move actually to Worthing was the transition almost from one side of the footlights to the other?
Yes, it was. And really my 6 years, I was in charge of the theatre, I was director of the theatre for 6 years. And in that time, I think it was a big growing up experience, because heights of happiness and moments of great despair. I think you go into a repertory situation thinking that if you give quality, it will give you the return, and it doesn't necessarily. But I did meet wonderful people who have been an enormous influence on my life, and I may well have been on theirs. There are people I came to loathe because of their selfishness and their arrogance, but a great many people whose example and experience taught me a great deal, and I think I've been able to pass that on. But I mean, it's tragic today that young actors and actresses don't have that chance for repertory training. When you think you left drama school and you went to a rep and you, with a bit of luck, might have played 48 parts in a 12-month. Now they're lucky to play 48 parts in a career.
Yeah.
So therefore the versatility is not there. And also, of course, it knocks all the edges off, Ian. That's the difference. I remember doing a play called The Kingfisher by William Douglas Hume and having Michael Dennison and Dulcie Gray playing the two leads, and lovely people they are. And opened on a Wednesday, and it was the first play after the pantomime. And I remember we opened on a Wednesday, and I remember going up to Michael's dressing room on the Friday and saying, "Now, Michael, you are upsetting my wardrobe department." "Oh, why? Why? What have I done?" I said, "You're supposed to change your shirt every performance, and hanging on to it is upsetting the wardrobe department." And he said, "I just don't want to be a trouble." And I thought, we've just done the pantomime when lots of kids are playing their first parts in panto. Every single one of them put their entire wardrobe out every day to be either dry cleaned or washed. And that was the difference. And it does knock the edges off you. And I find that now, when working with professionals, you can tell the ones which had the rep experience, because you just get on and do it.
Yeah. Was this where you first started to direct?
No, I'd done a lot of directing before then, and it was through that, of course, that I went into festival work.
And when did that start, David, the festival
in
work?
the 70s. I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? It's nearly 40 years ago. We must have met about 40 years ago.
Yes.
We were but lads.
That's right. Well, I was.
But festival work, festival work developed, and it was a pure fluke. It was a pure fluke that I went into doing adjudicating of festival work. But as I think I said last night, it's terribly important, if you're an adjudicator, to have had the rough side of everything.
That's right.
Because you pays your money and the lights come on and the curtain goes up and the causes are there and everything, and you think it just happens, never realising the hours of anxiety that precedes that. So Waterford is the oldest of all the musical theatre festivals, isn't it? And something of an experience. They were about to celebrate their 21st year. So it was to be a celebration, and they had the bright idea, which backfired on them, of that all the competitors in the 21st years had to have been previous winners. So you must have been there, because you were a winner, weren't you?
Yeah. Which year was that?
79.
Yes.
You'd have been there, wouldn't you? So they were all winners. Well, if you were a winner sort of 21 years ago, it didn't say you were still a winner 21 years later, and by golly, some of them weren't. Oh, it was a nightmare. But they were looking for a fresh approach, because it was an anniversary. They didn't want to stroll down memory lane, and that was good thinking, but a risk. And they got in touch with NODA, the National Operatic and Dramatic Association, and asked the then administrator, Andrew Potter, for someone they could recommend, and he strangely recommended me. And I went. And it really was a tremendous eye-opener. Festival work 30 years ago was quite different to how it is now. I mean, David Lace, whom you see selling programmes every night, 32 years ago, I told him to move into the 20th century and take his socks off under his tights. And every time we see one another, it's true, isn't it?
I remember, yes.
And it's true, even now, 32 years later, he still says to me, "I take my socks off." But it was very basic. There was a lot of very basic work. It was quite scary. I remember in my first year at Waterford, I think I must have nagged on and on and on about reality of props. You know, you get your bit between your teeth on a particular subject and you can't get off it. It's like shoes with me, this festival. But I couldn't, I don't know, I must have gone on and on and on about props. Well, we had this company, which shall remain nameless, to do Oklahoma. So they were going to have reality. And you know the story of Oklahoma, I'm sure. Lorry comes out of the farm to hang the washing on the line when Curly is talking to Aunt Ella. Well, this washing was so wet. They pegged it on this line across the stage at the Theatre Royal, and the water poured off these clothes. And it ran all down the stage, filled the footlights, and blew them. They blew up. So I always remember that. And I also remember Curly was 62.
Let's have record number 4.
Well, I chose the number 4 because it's my festival memory. I love doing festival work. I keep saying it's time I gave up. But it's really been, I've had a wonderful, frightening time, I can tell you. At Waterford, I was advised to stay in my room whilst one society left the town, which was a production of The Merry Widow. But the Irish are enormously effusive, aren't they, and affectionate. And in my years of going to Waterford, and I've been 8 times, I've made a lot of really, really good friends. Strangely, none of them festival officials. I've never been to a festival official's home for a cup of tea or anything. But the people in the city are just amazing. I mean, you know, they come up to you in the street and they'll say, "Come and have a bit of supper tonight." Well, you don't know who they are from Adam. And it's really lovely. And I made a lot of friends. In fact, when I went back 2 years ago, and it had been a few years since I'd been, I was walking up Strand Street. They're so honest. I was walking up Strand Street in Waterford City, which is the big shopping street. And a lady from the other side of the road said, "Hello, how are you?" And I said, "I'm fine, thank you. It's good to see you, Mr. Turner." So I said, "Thank you, it's good to be back." She said, "You've improved." I mean, it's just the honesty of them, but they are really quite incredible. And I find when I'm at Waterford adjudicating, and it's nothing for the performances to end after midnight, is it? I don't know why the dickens they do, but they do go on, don't they? They ask you out for supper. And it's just lovely, the friendships which I've made there. And I remember one night, and this is why I've chosen, because this is my festival memory, coming back to the Tower Hotel, which is the festival hotel, and walking in. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning, and the festival club was packed to the roof. And there was a little old folksy lady sitting on a chair playing Cavatina. And it was just magic. Isn't that interesting, though? In a festival club, yes, we always measure its success by its ebullience and noise, but to get silence, it was magic. I've never forgotten it. And every time I can see that lady, she's probably dead and gone now, bless her, but it was just wonderful, the silence.
Yes. There were those nights at Waterford, which I remember. We've had a few here, and they are very special. It's special.
It takes years to build that up.
Yes, it does.
It takes years and years, but it is special.
What exactly does a theatre administrator and ultimately a theatre director do?
Everything. I do mean everything. From going in, of course, at 8:30 in the morning, do the post, take a rehearsal, probably interview someone in the lunchtime, rehearse in the afternoon, production meeting after rehearsal, put your evening suit on and greet people at the door and show them to their seats and go home at 11:10. Yeah. And you do that 6 days a week. And probably, if bookings are good, you go in on Sunday because the box office cannot cope with the advance. So it is a commitment.
So if you were doing 30 or 40 plays or productions in a year, would you be directing?
No, you don't. You do every other one or something, because you just physically cannot do it. Right. I remember somebody ringing the theatre wanting me, and I picked up the extension and I said design workshop, because that's where I was at that moment, at the design workshop. And they said, good heavens, what are you doing in the design workshop? I said, well, if you'd have rung the cleaners, you'd have probably got me too. Yeah. And it really was. I, of course, was in repertory in that devastating time of the Arts Council, when they brought in, I think it was just appalling, they brought in what they called the glory of the garden, which was the cutting back of the support for repertory companies. And I was a seaside rep, and it was their policy to get rid of all the seaside reps, which they've actually managed to do. And it really was quite a terrible time. And I found that, once things start to go against you, it seems to gather momentum. We were cut. Whenever I go along the Embankment in London, I look at the sign outside the National Theatre, that ticker tape sign thing they have. I mean, our grant was comparatively small. 77,000 seems a lot of money, but it's not in theatre terms, when most theatres get over $1 million. We got 77,000, which was small. And the morning I got the correspondence from the Arts Council saying, your grant has been cut totally, they announced on the same day a grant to the National Theatre for a new sign outside costing £77,000. So I always look at it whenever I go along the Embankment and I think, that's mine. Yeah. But we struggled on for a year, and it really was a pretty frightening time. And as Buxton is going through this battle for the image of Buxton in the future, which is really quite scary, fighting with Worthing Borough Council for the future of the repertory company was tough. And I went to the public meeting where the vote to get rid of the theatre was 31 voted against the theatre continuing and 5 voted for it to stay. So that was the end of 51 years. And I remember coming back from the town hall, and that very day we'd had a new carpet put down in the foyer. And it was, what new carpets are like, bits of fluff and everything. And I got the vacuum cleaner out, and I started to hoover it and clean it. And all the press came rushing over to me and said, Mr. Turner, why are you doing this? The theatre's closing. I said, it may be closing, but there's a performance tonight. And, that's rep. And I mean, you have to take all the knocks and the knives in the back and the hugs and the kisses, but
I was going to say, over the years that you were there, you directed some very formidable stars.
I was very lucky. I was able to lure people to come and play at the theatre, and became great friends with most of them. I have to say there was the occasional nightmare, but not very often, because the older element, it's a commitment, Ian, it really is. I mean, nowadays in London, we have, when we're engaging actors, we actually engage them for X number of pounds a week, and at the end of their contract, we give them a bonus of, say, £2,000, but there is a rider that if you miss a performance, we deduct £75 out of the 2,000. So if you miss 2 performances in your year, or however long the contract is, that's £150 deducted from your 2,000. And that is only there to get the actors to turn up. Isn't that frightening?
Yeah. Of the names, David, again, I remember Anne and Eagle, I remember Michael Denison, Dulcie Gray, Margaret Lockwood, I think, was another.
Well, not in my time, but she was there before me. Yeah. I mean, we did lure lots of really famous people, because they probably had always wanted to play a particular part and it had never come their way. So here was an opportunity to do it for 3 weeks.
Yes.
They don't want 6 months. You see, Judi Dench won't do more than 6 months in the West End. And I can understand it. I mean, it does get terribly boring going out there every night delivering the same lines. And it isn't that the boredom shows, it's that you become so familiar with those words, you don't know if you've said them.
Yes.
And that is frightening. That is really frightening. I mean, we always have, it's perfectly true, we always have a joke in The Mousetrap that one of the actors playing the role of Major Metcalfe, which is the smallest role in the play, I have to say, one night fell asleep in the second act and woke up 11 pages ahead of the others. He just was completely lost. And it sounds, but it's frightening. Yeah. Yeah. It is frightening.
Was this the time when you started to go out and direct amateur companies?
Yes, I seem to have worked with amateur companies forever and ever, amen. Yes, I've been doing it for a very long time. It was in Worthing I really did my first one. And of course, in those days, one was encouraged to work in the community. There's an awful lot of talk about community these days, and the idea was that the theatre in the town would go out and help groups. And it's good thinking. But the bad side of it, the downside of it is you just really haven't got time. Mm-hmm. I know when you walk into a theatre and you see people sitting around and you think, gosh, they have a cushy time, but it's not like that at all. There's just so much to think about. The Arts Council have now instigated, how it would ever work I don't know, but they've now instigated for directors thinking time. Well, as if you don't ever stop thinking. You know, wherever you are. I used to, when I had the rep, I used to have a pad at the side of the bed because I woke up in the night and thought of something. I used to write it down. I mean, the whole of your time is thinking.
Sure.
And teaching. I mean, it was so lovely the other evening to go into the clubhouse and little Hannah Jones, who was in the chorus of Yeoman, came up, walked across to me and said, "Hello, Mr. Turner." And I said, "Hello." And she said, "You don't know me, do you?" And I said, "No, who are you?" And she said, "I'm little Hannah." And she was Gretel for me in The Sound of Music, in a professional production. Yes. And she was a sweetheart. Yes. She still is a sweetheart. Yes. And I thought, well, how lovely. You know, here she is. And a number of them have done very well. I'm terribly thrilled that, and I think it's to the detriment of our profession, that the rep system has gone. But I'm very proud that Michael Grandage, who is the director in the West End with Guys and Dolls and the Donmar Warehouse and everywhere, Michael Grandage I took out of drama school, gave him his first job, clipped his ear, really told him off, and he's now one of the world's most important directors and is scheduled, of course, to take over eventually the National Theatre. Yeah. And that's what it was all about. And really, Ian, I'm getting on a hobby horse, you can tell, can't you? That's really what we should aim to do with an amateur company. Not just get the show on, but it be a learning process.
Yes, yes.
That's really what it's about.
You mentioned earlier that Constance Shacklock had an impact on your life, and
She did.
Tell us about it.
I mean, I'd always thought she was quite something at the last night of the prom. She used to sweep on like a great galleon and stand there and sock it to them. And I remember walking across Cambridge Circus, and this has got to be a long, long time ago, and seeing her name up in lights, because she, of course, was the Mother Abbess in The Sound of Music. And it said, Sound of Music to the Constance Shacklock. And I thought, gosh, Constance Shacklock in a musical. And I went to see it, and I loved it. I mean, I really did love it. It's always been very close to me. And I wrote my very first fan letter. And I wrote to her and said how much I'd enjoyed her performance. And she invited me to meet her. And really, she became a great guide for me. She offered lots of advice, good advice, she could easily, and she was right, I mean, she could have easily have opened doors, but that's not the way to get on. You've got to do it yourself. But she advised me greatly, and I know years later, when she became a very famous adjudicator, putting a group into a festival, and in what was known as a staged ensemble class, and I put them in to do tradition from Fiddler on the Roof. And I was very un-festival-like, because I gathered them on stage and I said, now, you can forget all this nonsense about the joy of competing. You're here for one reason and one reason only, and that is to win. Just see you do. And I came off stage, and of course Constance Shacklock was the adjudicator. Now, I didn't let her know I was anything to do with it. Anyway, she gave us the first prize. And I came down the aisle to get the trophy, and she just said, you. So she's always been a guiding light. So it has to be Climb Every Mountain from The Sound of Music, as sung by Constance Shacklock. Not bad, is it, for a former member of the Nottingham Operatic Society?
Wonderful voice.
So Worthing was closing. You were out of a job.
I was.
So what happened next?
Well, I was suddenly on the market, quite honestly, to do whatever came along. I took on a lot of amateur productions, and then, of course, The Mousetrap loomed its head, which was the result of a play I'd directed at Worthing. I'd done a number of plays by William Douglas Hume, who was, of course, brother of the Prime Minister, former Prime Minister. And Willie was quite a character. I mean, I've got letters from Willie I've never yet ever been able to decipher. He's the world's worst writer. In his biography, he's inscribed it for me, and I can't read what he says. It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. But he was a lovely man, and did a play called The Kingfisher with the Denisons. And Willie and his wife is the Baroness Dacre, and he and Rachel came to see the play and very much enjoyed it. And he said to me afterwards, you want to do more of my plays? Well, of course he did. The royalties are quite useful. And did The Dame of Sark, which was one of his great successes. And after The Dame of Sark, he and Rachel came again to the first night, and I took him back to his car after the performance, and he said to me, why don't you let me write you a play? Well, it's not every day you get an offer like that. And I said, well, yes, of course, Mr. Douglas here, and that would be wonderful. And he wrote a play which he called David and Jonathan. And he sent the play to me, and it was quite controversial, and I took it to my programme planning committee of the Borough Council for the professional repertory theatre. And I can tell you what hard work it was, because we never ever had a programme planning committee, but what we didn't end up talking about Tallulah Bankhead. Can you believe it? I mean, we were really not in the same age. Anyway, I took this, and the board agreed to do it because it would be a premiere. But of course, one works so far in advance. I mean, you're thinking about next year's festival now. It all falls into place for a long time ahead. So I got in touch with William Douglas Hume, and I said, yes, we'll do it, but we can't do it now. So he said, oh, I want it done. And I said, well, I can understand that, but I'm afraid I can't do it for you now. So he said, right, I'll get someone else. And I said, I understand. So he got the rep at Farnham in Surrey to do it, and got Sean Bean. Can you remember Sean Bean to play the lead in it? I don't think Sean Bean it wasn't quite in the Heinz variety then. It was a cheaper brand that he was. And the play opened, and it was okay. And he invited me to go and see it, which I did. And afterwards he said, will you tell me what's wrong with it? Well, it's very difficult. I mean, it's like talking to Shakespeare and saying you got Romeo and Juliet wrong. And I said, well, I can't possibly tell you. He said, there are things wrong with it. Go home, write me a letter and tell me what's wrong with this play. So I did. It was easy to write it in a letter. About 3 months later, a brown paper parcel came, and in it was the play, now called And As for Jonathan. And a note I did manage to decipher which just said, I've done everything as you said, now do it. And I did. And we did it, and we got very good notices. Some of the national press came and were very encouraging. And William Douglas Hume's agent in the West End was Sir Peter Saunders. And Sir Peter Saunders and his wife, Katie Boyle, came to a matinee when we had 36 in to watch And As for Jonathan. And there and then he paid £5,000 for the rights to present it in London. And I got very excited. I thought, wow, here we are on the way to the West End. And it went very quiet, as it has a habit of doing. And in the end, he really was terribly worried. Peter Saunders was very worried and thought perhaps it wasn't a good idea, but Katie Boyle believed in it. So Lady Saunders had a lot of influence over him, and it was agreed to present it at Windsor in a new production, but they would take My Young Leading Man, but that was it. New director, new everything. And it was to be directed by a good friend of mine, and it went into rehearsal and opened, and Peter Saunders got 19 of the national press there on the first night, which was no small undertaking, and all 19 of them hated every second of it. Really got a slamming. And the lady who directed it, I was going up to see it, and she said, you're not going to come, are you? You're not going to come. And she hovered outside the theatre almost to prevent me going in. But it wasn't all that it should be, and it died and has never been seen again, which is a pity. But I got a phone call in my resting period, and as a matter of fact, I was just going out the door. I was going to Peterborough, where I had directed a production of Perchance to Dream, and it must have been a Friday, because I was going back for the end of the show, and the phone rang, and I thought, oh damn, I'm not going back, because I lived in a flat in those days, masses of stairs, and I thought, no, go on, answer it. And the voice said, David Turner. And I said yes. He said, Peter Saunders here. And I thought, who the dickens is Peter Saunders? Oh, crumbs, yes. Oh, I said, oh, hello. He said, my wife and I met you at Worthing last year when you did Willie's play. And I said, that's right. He said, I wonder if you'd be interested in directing The Mousetrap for me in the West End. So I said, well, yes. He said, well, there's no rush. He said, no rush, but he said, when you're next in town, he said, pop in and see me, would you? I said, well, I'm in town on Wednesday. I thought, better get this, strike while the iron is hot. I wasn't going to be in town on Wednesday, but... And I went to see him, and the contracts were drawn up, and we both signed it for me to direct The Mousetrap in 1987, 19 years ago. And when both signatures were on that contract, I said to him, Sir Peter, why have you asked me? And he said, and I thought he was not a generous man in many ways, but I thought was enormously generous, he said to me, well, he said, Kate and I came to Worthing to see Willie's play. And he said, I didn't have enough faith in you, he said, to bring it into town. And perhaps this will make up for it. And I thought that was terribly generous. And I've really been there ever since. And of course it's been the opening to many other things, the work of the Mousetrap Foundation, and all the committees, the Olivier Awards, sure. And the training committees and that. So it was a whole new world. And that's really, as I say, Constance Shacklock always said, let life unfold. And that's just what I've done. I've really been quite lazy, but I've always felt time is mapped out for us.
Let's have number 5, 6.
Fly Home, Little Heart. I founded a society in Worthing, an amateur company, and I wanted someone to be a figurehead. And I've always been a bit cheeky. And as the first production was to be Glamorous Night by Ivan Novello, I thought, well, I'll get one of his leading ladies to be the president. And I wrote to Olive Gilbert, for whom, of course, Ivor Novello wrote We'll Gather Lilacs, etc., and asked her if she would become the president. And she said yes, much to my amazement. And there began a real friendship. Ivor Novello, whom I never actually saw, I think must have been quite special, because he gathered around him lovely people, and Olive has to be among the loveliest. She was such a good friend, and she came, we did lots of things with her. She came and sang for us, and I remember I still had the flat those days in Worthing, and we were doing a charity concert which she was going to be singing in, this very song. And she wanted to rest before the performance, so she had my bedroom, and I had put a little notice on it, on the top of it, which said, Olive Gilbert slept here. And we did the concert. And when I came back at night and I went to go to bed, it said over my bed, Olive Gilbert slept here alone. She had a wonderful sense of humour, and Terry and I, we went to see her, bless her, when she really was dying in a nursing home, and like all things, get abandoned, you know, when the nasties come along. And she, of course, was Sister Margaretta in the long-running Sound of Music, like Constance Shacklock. 6 years she was Sister Margaretta. And she really was very poor. And we went to see her, it was night, I remember, and we knelt at the side of her bed, and she really wasn't conscious. And we just knelt there and said, hello, Olive. And she opened her eyes, and then she shut them tight, and she said, and God bless the Reverend Mother, Sister Margaretta, and all the old girls in Nomberg Abbey, which was part of the Sound of Music. She really was an incredible lady. And this song from Fly Home Little Heart, which is from King's Rhapsody, is Olive at her most beautiful. She was a sweetheart.
Lovely. Yes.
She was a sweetheart. She had a wonderful swear word, and I use it frequently. Whenever she got really cross, she'd say, Schweppes. You can do that with real feeling, I can tell you.
I mean, if we come now and look in a bit more detail at the adjudication side, David, I mean, the first time I was exposed to an adjudicator was actually Waterford in '67, which was many, I was only very, very, very young.
You were but a lad then.
And then we went with Bradford for 3 years, and it was quite an interesting time. And then, of course, we came back in, we were the first English group to go back 5, 6 years later. They hadn't had one for 5, 6 years because of Bloody Sunday and all that thing. And that was when we first met. And then from Waterford...
I think it was Princess Ida.
Well, the sequence we went was Islanthe, Patience, Macada. I can't really remember. It might have been 79 Ida.
I just remember lovely Joyce Ross. Was it Ross?
Joan.
Not Joan. No. The tall lady.
Joyce Relton.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wasn't she wonderful?
Yeah.
This big lady, wasn't she? Not. I don't mean tall, wasn't she?
Tall.
Crikey, she came on stage and frightened the life out of me, didn't she?
That's right.
She was wonderful.
But you then, there was a festival, you went to Bangor.
Yes, I really got all the festivals in a way.
Yes.
I think it actually was the inefficiency of Waterford that it gathered momentum. Because at Waterford there is it's an unwritten rule that you adjudicate but twice. That you do 2 years and then that's it. If you're really terrible, you only get one. Yeah. But they're fairly tolerant. And I went and did the 21st year. And they had a wonderful secretary called Jimmy Hassey.
Yeah.
I never knew a word he ever said. I never did. He used to be talking to me about, and I used to say, oh yes, and yeah. I never knew what he was on about ever, did you?
No.
It was terrible. His wife was a nightmare, you know, if you sat next to her at dinner. She used to... I'm really rabbiting on, aren't I? I'm sorry, but he had a very funny wife. She had a penchant for after-dinner mince. And you'd be at a quite posh dinner, and the plate of mince would come round, and Mary would get them, open a bag, pour them in. And she did that every time. Anyway, I'll get back on the subject. That's my memory of... But Jimmy said to me at the end of the festival, as best I could understand, would you be interested in coming back again? And I said, well, yes, I would. Well, I never heard another word. The next letter I had, the only letter I ever had was in July saying, we're looking forward to seeing you in September. And I said, well, I'm ever so sorry, but you won't, because I'm doing something else. You know, well, we wanted you to come back. And I said, well, I'm sorry, you can't. Anyway, they got a man who made notes, I am told, on the back of a postage stamp. I'm sure that's an exaggeration. But it didn't work out. So they asked me for the next year. So I did the 21st year and the 23rd year. So that was my 2. Then, of course, 2 years later was the Silver Jubilee. So they rang me up and said, will you come and do the Silver Jubilee? So I did the Silver Jubilee. And then 5 years later, they rang up and said, it's the 30th festival, will you come and do the 30th? And so I've sort of gone back forever and ever, amen. So I've really gone past me 2.
That's right. But from that,
I mean, as you were saying, there was a Northern Ireland festival at Bangor, which I did, which was different but amazing. Can you believe it was the theatre was an old converted bus garage? I mean, it really was. It was a bit primitive, but magic. Mm. Magic. Did you never play that?
Never, no.
That's a bit of Irish, isn't it? Yes. Did you not play that? And then, of course, the 3 Welsh festivals.
That's right.
And I was never meant to go to the 3... I have let life unfold. I was never meant to go. The lady that was to adjudicate the Welsh festivals developed appendicitis 10 days before the festival, and they got in touch with me and I could go. And I did it, and I did them all.
What years were they, David?
I don't know, 81, 82, 80...
No, it was a lot later.
Was it?
Well, because the reason I was leading to this is that it was to an extent, this festival was a result of my sitting down with you in Newport and saying, I have this idea of a Gilbert and Sullivan festival. If I were to do it, would you come and adjudicate? David said yes. And I went back home and I said to Neil, I said, well, we've got one piece of the jigsaw in, we now need to just think of it. Yeah. And
I remember us having that talk.
Yes, very good. I mean, one of the criticisms, I guess, of many who go to a Waterford-type festival is how can an adjudicator adjudicate across the whole spectrum of musicals, Gilbert and Sullivan? Is it difficult?
No, I don't find it difficult, because that's the piece you've got. You weigh up its merits and you may weigh up its weaknesses and so on. I think in terms of Waterford, the makeup is changing. I mean, you must feel this. One goes to Waterford and you can be adjudicating Zorba, things which have never been seen in England. I mean, they get special release for them. And there have been some amazing productions there.
Yeah.
I remember Mac and Mabel. Well, twice I went on stage. Shows how sentimental I am. But twice I went on stage and I just couldn't speak. I was so upset. Mac and Mabel was just breathtaking. When Mabel died, I couldn't talk about it. Tears.
Yeah.
It's almost now I can remember it. And indeed, when Andrew Nicklin took Sweeney Todd, God, it seemed like eternity, and I couldn't speak.
Yeah.
Made all the national press the next day. Well, I really got some publicity out of that. But it's changed.
Yes.
It's changed, and not necessarily for the better, because in the old days, you got societies from Lurgan, which was in the Bandit country, and my golly, they managed to put a show together was a miracle.
That's
it was
right.
pretty awful, but I mean, they did put a show together.
Sorry.
And Bangor itself, and all those little places, a lot of the Welsh societies came. There was a great Welsh input. That has gone, and it has become big business.
Yes.
And I think that is scary.
Yes, I mean, I think we went back, or I took a group back last year, and I sensed the big change, that Gilbert, the simple Gilbert and Sullivan, the opportunity today is probably far remote from what it might have been 20 years ago. The settings, I mean, I think the scenery that is now being brought in, it's like almost West End productions.
I mean, it's just amazing. The Little Theatre Royal in Waterford is not the easiest theatre, is it?
It's not.
I remember going into the dressing rooms under the stage and they had earth floors. Can you believe it? Earth floors in this time. But to get what they call the buzz, it's really exciting when you come out in the interval at Waterford and you can feel that buzz. And it's lovely because they're very good. They never come to me. And it doesn't happen here either, which is lovely. People don't come and say, what do you think to it or anything. But in Waterford, in Ireland, they come to you and they say, it's one of two things. 'Tis something. That's because it's good. And if it's not, 'tis desperate. And it's true. And I'll tell you this, if it is desperate, they won't be there for the second half. The place is empty.
But I mean, one of the main buzzes was when they started stamping the feet up in the gods.
Oh, yes.
And that again was an indication that you had something.
Yes, I mean, it happens here in a different way, and that you won't experience. I mean, some nights here, and certainly some nights in any festival, there are moments when at the end of the performance you can't wait to get on the stage.
Yes.
One never can say everything that everybody wants you to. It's quite amazing what the general public want from you. I mean, if you were to say all the things everybody expects you to say, you'd be there all night. And it's ludicrous, it's not meant to do that. But some nights the buzz is there, and it's really... you know, Neil, who usually fetches me from the circle here, and he always says, what did you think to it? He always likes a little preview.
Yes, he does.
He does.
And
he
he
always
comes
says
and
it to me every
whispers
night.
quickly to
What do
me
you think
before
to
you
it?
said it.
And it's
Didn't
always out
like
the
it.
corner of his mouth. And there's only the two of us there, so I don't know why. It's very funny. And he said, what do you think to it? I said, cool, it's rough tonight. I'll dress it up a bit, I said. Because we don't have the right to hurt people's feelings. And it's the easiest thing in the world. I think one of the dangerous things about adjudicating is a desire to be popular. Because if you do, you can make a cheap joke at somebody's expense, and you can look a great guy, but it's not on.
No.
It's not on. And what you have to remember, somebody might have been awful. They shouldn't even be allowed to sell ice creams, let alone be on the stage. But they've done their best. And we are talking about them at their most vulnerable. You know, you've just given your all, and it might have been rubbish, but that's all you'd got, and you'd give. Nobody has the right to tell them.
No.
No.
I mean, I would agree with you. It's possibly the hardest thing that we have is this question of adjudication. You must remember going back to the early days when the Americans came, and I mean, I was pinned up against the wall. Who's that man who's going out and talking about us? If I'd known, we wouldn't have come. So in America, it's it's not as common.
No, but I think the sensitivity is still there. My very first year at Waterford, I don't remember too much about it. It's a long time ago. But we had a sort of dinner, supper or something, I can't remember, at the end of the festival. And they have awards coming out your ears, don't they? There's about 30. And this society which did Oklahoma, which fused the footlights, stood up at this public gathering and said, gosh, I felt about as big as that, said, we'd like to offer a new trophy to be awarded at this festival. And everybody applauded. And they said, we'd like it to be awarded this year. Well, which is a bit tricky. Well, you imagine someone doing that to you. And they said, we'd like it to be awarded this year. So they said, Jimmy Hassey said, what's it for? And he said, it's for the worst adjudicator in the world. And I had to sit there in front of all those people and take it. People's feelings are. And it's just making... I think sometimes it's like in rehearsal, Ian, when someone's doing something wrong and you say, come on, try it this way. Now, doesn't that feel better? That's really what we're doing.
Sure. Let's have a look at record number 7.
Well, this is a bit of real sludge, this is. Because if it doesn't remind you of romantic times, you've got no soul. When I was at Worthing, and things were very difficult, and the theatre was actually closed for a season, I needed something to sell every seat for me. And I got in touch with Hazel de Leon, who is a very powerful London agent, to see if she could persuade Dame Anna Neagle to come and play for us. And amazingly, she said yes. And there began a friendship with Anna that was something I treasure. She was a remarkable lady. She stayed with me, and I'm not going to travel down the road of all the old anecdotes of mine, but she stayed with me for 9 weeks, which was an incredibly long time to be sharing a flat with someone, especially a star, and she was a star. But we became enormously good friends, and it was her warmth, her joy of living, her naivety, her love for everything and everybody that has never left me. In rehearsal, one obviously broke at lunchtime. We had in Worthing in those days, I can't remember the Toby Jug. The Toby Jug was a little, well, it was a rough old cafe, but they used to do steam puddings. And Dame Anna was rather partial to a jam sponge or a treacle sponge or whatever. So we used to go there for lunch every day. And after about 3 days, I said to her, I can't walk down the street with you. I'm sorry, I just cannot do it. And she said, why? I said, I mean, when you're with someone famous, you get people coming up to you all the time. And people were, of course, with her. I said, I just can't cope with it, Anna. And she said, why? But I said, well, it's so moving. They didn't come up and say, gosh, are you Anna Neagle? They used to come up and say, God bless you. And I thought, I can't cope with this. It was so emotional. And I never realised what it was. And then, of course, when I thought about it, I, as a lad, was taken to the Regal in Kettering by my parents to see Spring in Park Lane with Michael Wilding and Maytime in Mayfair and the Courtneys of Curzon Street, where Anna Neagle and Michael Wilding were stars. And it was I thought it was quite wonderful. Recently, television did the 100 best films, and I thought way at the top's going to be Harry Potter. But number 3 was Anna Neagle in Spring in Park Lane. Can you imagine, after all these years and all the big blockbusters, Star Wars and everything, Spring in Park Lane? But in Spring in Park Lane, there is a very wonderful dance sequence with Anna and Michael Wilding. And I have to say, it's not everybody that can boast they've had Anna Neagle waltzing and dancing around their sitting room, as she often did. I mean, she was in her 70s. So a little bit of schmaltz in memory of the loveliest lady that ever was. It's The Moment I Saw You from Spring in Park Lane. That's a bit of real romance, isn't it? 2 quick little stories about Anna. Terry and I don't quite know why, but we took Anna to Guildford for something at the Yvonne Arnaud Theatre, where we had dinner. And always with Anna, there would always be somebody who would spot her because she was such a well-known person. And during dinner, this fellow had obviously clocked Anna Neagle, and I said, watch it. And he came over to her and he said, excuse me, Dame Anna, you won't remember me, but I met you in Canada in 1940. And she said, just a moment. She opened her handbag and she took out her powder compact, which she opened, and in it it said, to Anna Neagle, from the people of Canada, 1940. Wasn't that a fluke? And the lovely thing of... well, no, I've got to tell you 2 little things. She being interviewed like we're being interviewed, and it was while she was staying with me, she had to go up and she did an interview on BBC with Noel Edmonds. And you know, when you get interviewed, you get asked... I'm always asked the same dozen questions about the mousetrap. And he caught her out by asking her a question she'd never been asked in her life before. And I thought it spoke volumes for her, because he said to her, Dame Anna, how did you cope when you became a celebrity? And she said, it never occurred to me that I was. Can you believe it? I mean, she really was remarkable. Remarkable.
If we go back to the mousetrap, David, you know, in the last few years, presumably over the 20 years that you've had such a close connection with it, you've had all sorts of visitors.
Yes, the Queen.
That's right.
I've looked after quite a lot of the royal family. Well, all sorts of people. You know, I called in one night. I'd never there in the evening, very, very rarely, and I popped in one night only to walk into the foyer behind Hugh Grant and Joan Collins, which I thought was quite interesting. But the royal family, Prince Edward. I also, of course, had the joy of working with the Countess of Wessex. She was our PR lady.
All right.
And Sophie is just a lovely lady. But, of course, the Queen, whom I had to bring on stage on the night of the Golden Jubilee. And people, and I was introduced to her backstage and so on. And the number of people which have said to me, what did you talk about to the Queen? I couldn't tell you. If somebody said, it's £1 million, what did you talk to the Queen about? I'd lose the £1 million because I cannot remember. But what I do remember is, I had to take her on stage and I said, now do be careful, Ma'am, when you step onto the stage. Every actor that's ever walked on here has caught their toe at some stage. I'm blowed if in the paper it didn't have a headline, Queen told to watch her step. Can you believe it? You know, you have to be so careful. You can't say or do anything. So I was nearly in the tower.
But the mousetrap must have, again, it's had a, I suppose, a semi-stabilising 20 years of your life.
It was like... I mean, it's very rare in the theatre that you are assured of X number of pounds is going to come in. And it was very funny. The Duke of Edinburgh is well known for putting his foot in it. But he's such a delightful man, and he was introduced at the Mousetrap Golden Jubilee to the people that have insured the play ever since 1952, Zurich Insurance. And they said to him, Your Royal Highness, this is Zurich Insurance, who've insured the play since 1952. And he said, You haven't had much of a risk, have you? Which I thought was quite lovely. No, it does do that, and it gives you the chance to put a home together, which is important. It also gives you a standing in the business. And it's, I'm not a very showy person, at least I don't think I am. And I'm a member of the Society of London Theatre, and I sit there at committees with the Lloyd Webbers and the etc., etc. And you're just one of a huge, great family.
Yeah.
And that is what is wonderful about the theatre. It is a huge, great family. And I'm very proud to have been part of it. And if I've contributed to it, well.
If we talk for a couple of minutes about Gilbert and Sullivan.
Oh, my goodness, yes.
Again, you've been experienced from directing it and adjudicating it. Is it in good state, would you say, today?
Yes, I think it is. I think the problem is audiences. I do think this is a problem.
Yeah.
But I think it's not something which is restricted to Gilbert and Sullivan. I think what is really scary for amateur theatre is indeed an audience. Also, of course, Ian, I think in the terms of an amateur company, it's worrying in that we don't have the people to do the jobs. The people to play the leads maybe, but you haven't somebody to put the chairs out and book the rehearsal room and do all the nitty-gritty. And I thought it was very sad. One of the great societies in this country, operatic society, was Stoke-on-Trent.
Yeah.
I mean, they really were a very famous society. And they've actually just folded. And they've gone out of business, not because they didn't have money in the bank, because they did. Not that they didn't have a big company, because they did. Not that they didn't get support at the theatre, because they did. Not because the theatre was taken away from them, because it was there. But there was no one to do the jobs. And that is worrying.
Yes.
It really is worrying. I mean, our generation, we grew up in a time when amateur theatre was the week of the year in the town you lived. I played Nathaniel in the Quaker Girl years ago, but all the time I ever lived in Kettering, I never went in the newsagents, but what they didn't say is Mr. Quaker.
Yeah.
You know, it was special, and maybe we've somehow got to make it special again.
Where are the new adjudicators coming from, David?
I don't know. It's not an easy job, and I'm not saying, one has special quality. I don't know, Ian. I just don't know.
I have never seen your pad other than from the stage. But
come and empty my bin in the old Hall Hotel, and you can find it.
There's 6 people just run out to go down and have a look. But basically, my assumption is that you are prepared for every performance, and because you write the character down or whatever it was, and the order in which you're going, which to my mind is the sign of a very disciplined adjudicator to begin with. So you need the discipline.
Yes. You've got to have all your headings there.
Yes.
And if you don't have those headings, then you are at sea.
Yes. And if you miss somebody, a lead, that's one of the worst things that can happen.
I don't think it's ever happened to me, but I'm always slightly worried. Because it's something one would never do intentionally.
No.
But what is terrifying, of course, is the heat of the moment. There is no time to prepare what you're going to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've said on more than one occasion, Lord, you better see me through this, because you need a bit of divine help.
But again, I think both here and in America, we went twice to the States, or 3 times to the States. You are a born diplomat. right, with a silver tongue. But also a massive knowledge of theatre, which again, so many people in the audience will come up to me and say, and he does, oh, I do enjoy it, because he does, and he throws this light on, oh, we saw that. And it's, I mean, do you get this?
Yes, to a degree. I'm always, gosh, you'll be looking for this tonight, I'm always conscious of the weight and almost the burden of responsibility of when you come out. You want to be informative, and there's good in the best of us and bad in, isn't there? There's good in the worst and bad in the best. And there's always something in somebody's performance that is worth drawing attention to. And of course, over the years, people begin to understand what you mean when you don't actually say what it is. When you say, now, don't be afraid to project, which means, for God's sake, speak up, we can't hear what you're saying. It really is as simple as that. And educating the audience is as important as educating the performer. Because if an audience isn't discerning, then where are we going to go? I've never confessed this. Here's big confession time. The most irritating thing about adjudicating is the clack from societies. You can pick them out, the ones, whose sister's playing the lead and whose son is... They fall out their seats laughing, and I'm sure you must have seen me at times. I sit there and I can hear this person having a fit, roaring with laughter with something that isn't remotely funny. And I occasionally feel myself turn very slowly. And by golly, it's what I give what is known as my supermarket look, which is when children are making a noise in the supermarket, I stare at them. And a little girl did it at breakfast today, and she kicked up her... And I gave her my supermarket look. She shut up like a clam. But it is annoying. You see, sometimes when you're working with an amateur group, they fall off their seats laughing at something, and you think, this is terrible. But they are laughing at Bert. They are not laughing at Jack Point.
That's right.
And when it comes to a theatre and in a festival, they get nothing. Well, of course not. Because it's timed wrongly or something. Yeah. But that is... I've confessed that about me being irritated by a clack in an audience. But it's a shame. It's a great shame. Because you want to support your team, and that's what you're there for. But be realistic.
What's the final record, David?
Oh, I thought you'd never get there, didn't you?
No, not at all.
Well, this is a strange choice. But in our business, you find yourself in some very odd situations. And I've said dozens of times, what the dickens am I doing here? What on earth am I doing this for? But there's usually something. And one of the things I used to do when I was a director of a repertory theatre was indeed to visit the other repertory companies. And I had to go and, I don't know what the word is, comment or make an observation on a play called The Last of the Red Hot Lovers by Neil Simon. Well, I have to say it was an evening to remember. I'm not surprised it was the last of the Red Hot Lovers. It was really awful, but the introductory music was a joy. And I've always enjoyed it ever since, and I think that's typical of life. We find ourselves thrown against other people, we find ourselves in situations we're not used to, but something will come out of it. And The Last of the Red Hot Lovers was awful, but out of it came Ice Castles.
I think this is your 9th festival, David, as adjudicator here in Buxton.
It is.
Have you seen the standard change?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we were very fortunate in that first festival. I know there were a lot of anxious moments, weren't there? But there was quality there. There was inexperienced youth there. Well, I don't think so. I think performance-wise, it's a very solid, well-trodden pathway that's a pathway to success.
Did you have a chance of seeing the Japanese?
No, I didn't. I unfortunately got bronchitis, and the doctor made me rest as much as I could and must fill me with antibiotics. I'm afraid while you were all watching that, I was in bed feeling sorry for myself.
I mean, I think what's quite interesting is come out from one or two of these is now there's more and more international Gilbert and Sullivan there seems to be.
Yes. I think that I think that is terribly important. I think somehow we need to encourage the English societies, of which there is an abundance, but somehow they seem to put their lights under a bushel and don't really push, do they?
No.
And there is some wonderful work there, and I would like to see that expand more.
We're going to work on that this next year. David, if we talk about outside work, do you have time for hobbies?
Not really. Home is a hobby.
Yeah. Where do you live? You live
in Worthing.
In Worthing. So you've been there now for
a long time.
Yeah.
Didn't really intend to go back. After the tragedy of the rep going, one just wanted to run, but it wasn't really the thing to do.
No.
A time in Harrogate, a time in Peterborough, and then strangely we find ourselves back in Worthing. I think that's where one's meant to be. I don't know that my reason for being there has been realised, but I'm there and I'll let life unfold.
Are you a practical person?
No. Well, there wasn't any point in...
But okay, so here we are now on an island. Would you be able to look after yourself?
Oh, I think I might.
Yeah.
But I couldn't build a shelter because the first puff of wind it'd blow down, but... I don't think I could be practical in that way, but I'd feed myself.
Would you want to try to escape?
I don't know about that. If I can have all of this music, all of which is packed with memories and an aspect of my life, I think I could be fairly content.
If you couldn't have all the music, but you could only take one, which one would you select?
I think it would have to be Be Not Afraid, because it's the basis of all my beliefs. I don't think I'm a particularly good Christian, I try. But if I didn't have that simple belief, I couldn't do anything, so it would have to be that.
Yeah. And if you could have a luxury?
My luxury? My luxury is my two cats. I've got to have Pickle and Primrose. And I'll tell you why. They were rescue cats. Both had a pretty tough first 6 months. One of them had been strangled, and they were really... But they never let you down. And during these last few years, I think it's to do with getting older. I've a great desire to be constantly saying thank you, because I realised as a teenager and in my early 20s, I didn't ever say thank you. I took things for granted. In fact, Neil said, I hope I get you because you do all the talking. I must shut up. But I was working in York, and when I was working in York at the Theatre Royal, every day I would walk through the Minster. I mean, what a fabulous building. Not such an inspiration. And one day I walked through the Minster, and I just was conscious of not being as grateful as I should be, and I decided there and then that I would write to the couple. They were now an old couple that ran the young people's Bible class, of which I was a member on a Sunday evening, and I and 40 others would go, and they'd have a crafty cigarette, and we burnt their furniture, and we drank their tea, but they held us together. And I really had sort of accepted that, and I suddenly thought, crikey, I wouldn't be where I am were it not for their influence. So assume they still lived in the same house, and I actually sat down and wrote and said, "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Young," etc. I know it's a bit late. It's taken me 25 years, but thank you.
Yes, very nice. Yeah. And what about, okay, well, you can take a book. We're going to give you Ian Bradley's annotated...
Oh, no, well, I was going to tell you about the cat.
Oh, the cats.
Let me cat.
Please.
Me cat.
Sorry,
Me cat.
yes.
Me cats. I've always tried to help others, and in these last 2 or 3 years, I've really made some enormous efforts for 1 or 2 people, several people, and have really moved heaven and earth for them. And I have to say, it's about 4 people. Every single one of them has kicked me in the teeth. You know, it's life today. But if I've been out taking a rehearsal and it's been a nightmare, and they are sometimes, you put the key in the lock and there's Pickle and Primrose at the bottom of the stairs waiting.
Yes. Yes.
You know, they're there always.
That's right.
So I've got to have those. And the book.
The book?
The book.
Which book would
Well, it's a very strange... Well, you'll think it's a strange book. I realise this is a very sentimental choice of everything. And I am very proud of this country of ours. And Dora Saint, who writes under the name Miss Reed, writes the most wonderful country books. She has 2 fictitious villages, Thrush Green and Fairacre, and she's written about 40 books of these 2 villages. And that's how life should be. And I've got all of them. And I read them again and again and again. If I'm under real stress, I read a Miss Reed book. You can still buy them. They are gentle, they're full of nothing, but by golly, they're a help. So it has to be any book of Miss Reed's.
We'll give you the whole 40.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, from a festival perspective, the position of adjudicator is obviously one of the most important and difficult decisions that a festival ever has to make. When David Turner said yes back in Newport, Wales, so many years ago, I felt we were at least on the right track. If I use the word safe hands, that really is intended to be the hugest possible compliment, because what we need is somebody who has the experience, the background, and is a safe pair of hands to ensure that nobody who goes into this festival goes away disappointed. It's been a real pleasure, David, having your choice of records this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We've gone on. Sorry.